Hello, my name is Kelly Lemon and I'm constantly being asked about property because it's one of the areas that I know an awful lot about. And I'm always asked, is property still a great investment? And I have to say, I think it absolutely is. And in this video, I'm going to share with you why I think it's such a good investment and some of the things that you can take advantage of when it comes to property so that you can build wealth. Because in essence, most of the people that go into property investment or real estate investment to build wealth. And it's been used time and time again. And why is it still such a safe, consistent way of building wealth when there's so many other things available out there on the market? And that's what this video is all about. So my name is Kelly Lemon, and the reason I'm making this video is because I am a property investor. I've won awards for property investing. I go around and talk around the country about property investing. So it's one of the areas that I know quite a bit about. But in order to kind of share with you why I still think it's such a fantastic investment, I need to take you back a few years to kind of what really opened my eyes to property investment. And in essence, it was a personal moment that happened to me when the penny really kind of dropped. Hang on a second, this is a really good way to build wealth in the long term. And I was starting very early on in my career. So I'm a journalist by trade. That's how I started. And I was working at a news corporation, reading the news. Really enjoyed it, and very early on in my career there were mass redundancies and I was one of them, and it came as a complete shock, and it really kind of rocked my world because back then everything I kind of thought I knew was leading to that moment, was kind of leading to my career, and just like that, I realised I was just a number. And when I was kind of processing that information, I realised that actually I still did have a source of income. And that income was from a property that I bought a few years before that I'd let to students. And that property, even though it was in negative equity, because this was around 2008 when the markets crashed, it was still bringing in a rental return every single month. And that's for me when the penny really dropped that, hang on a second, I have this asset that I can touch, see, feel, and even negative equity, it's still bringing in an income month by month. So that was a massive moment for me. And that's when really I kind of made the decision that no matter what I did in my career, I wanted to have an asset base. I wanted to have that pension pot, so to speak, and I wanted to have that income that would just come in month after month. And once it's set up, once you do the things that you need to do, that income just keeps coming in. So that's kind of why I really, at a very early age, sort of doubled down on property and kind of saw it as a great way to build wealth. And it was a real way for me to kind of plant the seeds for the future. And I always see properties, you sort of plant the seeds, you water it, you nurture it, you do all the things that you need to do with it, you look after it, so to speak, and then in return it looks after you. But anyway, that's my journey, that's my story. But the 6 reasons, the core reasons that I still think it's a real smart investment when you're trying to build wealth, which is invest in property or real estate, is because it's tangible. It's a real asset. You can see it. Now, I've spoken to loads of investors over the years that have invested in all sorts of weird and wonderful things that either they didn't understand or certainly things that they couldn't see and touch. And actually, it's very difficult when it's just on a computer screen. What I love about property and what I've always loved about property is it's a tangible asset. And for me, particularly when markets fluctuate, particularly when there's times of uncertainty, having that physical asset, for me, that tangible asset is a real upside. So that's one of the things and one of the reasons that I think property is such a good investment, because it's a tangible asset. And it appreciates over time. Now, markets go up and down. We always have things that happen where you'll sort of see bumps along the way. But if you sort of scale out and look at the property market, the UK property market, and pretty much all property markets, but certainly the UK property market, which is where I'm based, if you look at that over a 50, 100 year time period, you'll see that's a very steady trend. And that's because it's demand and supply. So when I look at an asset base, I'm not just looking at what returns it will get right now, or even just the foreseeable future. I'm looking at it for really long term, possibly even generational, because that's when you'll see those slow gains, slow and steady, compounded over time, make such a big difference. The third reason I think property is such a great investment is because it's one that you can leverage. Now, when you get this right, and there's loads more that I teach about leverage in a lot more detail, but I just wanted to get the concept here in this video. When you get it right, it can be fantastic. Although I will say when you get it wrong, it can also be, have very severe consequences. But the point being, if you wanted to invest in, say, stocks, and you wanted to buy £100,000 worth of stocks, then you would need £100,000 worth of money to invest in those stocks. What I love about property is you can actually buy a £100,000 property with a £25,000 deposit, which means you're getting a bank or a lender or some other institution to kind of fund the rest of that. But yet the growth on that asset you get. So if you buy that property with, say, £25,000, and if you did have £100,000 and you put it all into stocks, that's one option. But if you took the £100,000 and split it into 4 different deposit pots, then in essence you can buy 4 different properties. That's 4 different assets that are tangible. That's 4 different assets that will bring in an income. So it kind of hedges your bet, so to speak, if there's any challenges. But also, going back to my earlier reason, over a long period of time, that's 4 different assets that are growing in value. And even though you may have had a lender or a bank put in the mortgage to help you buy it, you get 100% of that growth. So I think that's a really, once you get that and you really utilise it, it's a really good reason and a really strong reason as to why I still think property is such a great investment. It creates monthly income. I've already touched on that, but that's a really big thing. Now, a lot of people that invest in stocks, so I used to be a financial journalist, so I used to talk about stocks and shares quite a lot. You know, you can get dividends, so you do get a return on them, but loads of shares, you don't. You simply buy at a certain price and then actually you make your money when you sell. What I love about property is for all of that time in between, you're getting an income. And it's not an income that somebody else decides. That's an income that you've got some influence and control over. So that's a really kind of important part for me, because when you're investing, yes, you want to think about the future, but I also want to think about now. And actually that liquidity on a monthly basis helps either grow that investment pot, or it helps for the future. You can control it. That's another thing I love about property. When you sort of invest in other asset classes, quite often you don't have any control. You know, really you're voting with your money, so to speak, but actually apart from that, you have very little control over it. If you've got a property or a property portfolio or an investment property or any real estate, you actually have quite a lot of control and influence over that. You can decide who the agent is, you can decide your tenant type, you can decide your strategy, you can decide your team, your area, your demographic, all sorts of things. In fact, when I train people about investing in property, I talk a lot about all the variables that you want to have an opinion on, you want to have an understanding with, because ultimately it's that ability to control that kind of gives you that sense of clarity, but also that sense of control, so that actually it's not just a passive investment, it's an investment that you kind of know a lot about and you know some of the variables around it, so that if any of those variables change for whatever reason, you've got a good understanding of what they are and kind of how you can improve it. Whereas with other things that you invest in, quite often you do not have a seat at the table. You may have some knowledge of what that person's telling you or what that institution's telling you, but you don't really have any visibility. So that's one of the things I love about property, is I love that you can control it. And I think one of the 5th thing now, actually I love about property and why I think it's such a good investment and still a really good investment to build wealth, is because you can force value. So you can increase the value. And what do I mean by that? Well, when you buy a real estate investment or a property investment, there are all sorts of things you can do to it. You can improve it, you can extend it, you can potentially do things with the land. You can actually take the house as it is and you convert it into a different type of house, which might rent for better returns, or it might rent to different tenant types. So for example, I quite often take a property, convert it into a HMO, and then I rent it to multiple tenants, and that allows me to get more income from that asset and in essence make it more valuable. So the great thing about property is, yes, you're buying something which, if you do it correctly, should A, we see an appreciation over time, B, give you an income, but actually to hedge your bets and to kind of, you know, force that process even more, you can even look at how you can add value. And that's really important. And it's just something else you can do to increase your investment base. You're not doing anything differently. You're just learning how to spot where and how you can kind of increase that investment. And the 6th reason that I think property is such a key area to building wealth is because it's backed by demand. That's the key thing. And I understand that demand at a very basic level. I mean, in the UK, we live on an island. There's only so much land. There are only so many properties, and demand outweighs supply. So that tells me that I've got a product or I've got an investment that there's always going to be a demand for. And I don't always have that in other investments. And I think the other thing, when you're building wealth, it's a demand and a product, a tangible product that I understand at a very base level. Most people understand property. Most people understand that actually you need somewhere to live. And if you don't own the property, then you rent a property. And they kind of understand those very basic fundamentals. When it comes to crypto, stocks, all sorts of other investments, a lot of people don't necessarily understand it. And for me, that's absolutely critical. So I love property because it's tangible. I love that it appreciates over time and we've kind of got that historical data. I love that you can leverage it. I love that you can control it. I love that you can add value to it. And I love that it's backed by demand. There's nothing better than having a product that people want. And it's a demand and a product that I understand. So for me, those are the 6 key reasons that property is still such a great investment if you're looking to build wealth. Now, it's not perfect and it's not passive. It's something that needs time, energy. It needs money invested into it. You need to understand some of the fundamentals. So all the things I've discussed there, those are kind of the headlines. You need to understand the detail behind them so that you can kind of maximize your return. But when it's done right, when you've planted that seed, so to speak, and you've set it up correctly, you've put it in ripe soil and you've given it the right environment to flourish, it will flourish and it will just carry on flourishing in the background. So I really cannot sort of be more enthusiastic about property and investing in property. And it's something that I've been doing for a long time now. And I've seen a lot of the ways that you do it. And I keep it very simple, but I've also seen the benefits of it. So one thing I've done actually that may be really helpful, like I said, I was a financial journalist by trade. I remember going into it and my job really was to take really complicated things and kind of make them simple so people can understand, because quite often people are talking about really complicated things or jargon or words that nobody really understands. Quite often the other person doesn't understand it. That's what I learnt when I went into finance. I thought they were all so much smarter, and it turned out that they weren't necessarily. So the same happens in property. People talk and they use all sorts of acronyms and jargon that actually means very simple things if it's explained correctly. So what I've done is I've created a jargon buster. So that's a PDF and a video. So with the video, not only do I explain it, but also I'll use a few examples. So it's kind of how you can look at your yield, your gross, your net, your return on investment, what those terms mean, how you calculate them, but perhaps more importantly, how and why you use them and why they're important. So underneath this video, or with this video, you will see a link to that. I highly recommend you download it and have a look through it. And if you do, or when you do, you'll join my community. And I'm building a community at the moment of people that want to know about property. They want to understand more about property. They want to build a property or real estate portfolio. They want some help, support, some peers along the way, because it can be a very lonely journey, property. So you will join that community when you look at the Jargon PDF and video, or there's a link if you want just to join it straight away. If you think, yeah, I want to know more about Kelly, I want to know more about her journey, I want to know how she kind of got there to Landlord of the Year, like what were the steps that got me there, and I want to join the community. So I hope you join. My name's Kelly Lemon, and this video is all about why I think property is still such a great investment when you're building wealth, and I will see you soon.